when my sister's husband shouted it across the porch. His voice sharp, dripping with ownership. It didn't sound like family anymore. Sounded like eviction. It sounded like I didn't belong in a place I had built with my own hands. I froze in the doorway, a teacup trembling in my hand, the steam swirling like the ghosts of every memory that house had ever held. My own beach house, I whispered under my breath, though in that moment it didn't feel like mine anymore. People always say family is complicated. But it isn't, not really. It's only complicated when love turns into debt, when every kindness you've given becomes a favor they can't wait to forget. The ocean was calm that morning. Calm. The waves rolled against the sand with a gentleness that felt almost cruel. Because inside, everything in me was breaking, quietly, politely, the way women my age have been trained to break. I'd given my sister and her husband the house years ago, or at least I let them live there. I told myself it was temporary, a kindness while they got back on their feet. They had 2 children then, and my sister swore she'd never forget what I'd done for her. But life has a strange way of testing promises. When my husband died, the world went very still. The laughter stopped echoing in the hallways, and the house became too big, too quiet. I thought letting them move in would bring life back to it. Did. For a while. The sound of children's feet on the deck became my comfort. Their toys scattered across the sand felt like company. But somewhere along the years the tone changed. Kindness turned into convenience. Gratitude into expectation. And I, the woman who had once owned this place, became something like furniture. Useful, silent, and ignored. I didn't notice the shift at first. It came slowly, the way storms do before they break the sky open. It started with small things. My coffee mugs disappearing, my favorite chair replaced, my photos taken down. Just redecorating, my sister had said. I smiled because that's what older sisters do. But sometimes you don't see the betrayal until it's standing in front of you, wearing a smile that doesn't reach its eyes. That morning, when her husband shouted at me to leave, as if I were some uninvited guest, I realized something. They'd already erased me long before the words left his mouth. And yet, I didn't argue. I just looked at him, then at my sister standing behind him, her eyes avoiding mine. The ocean kept whispering, indifferent. And somewhere deep inside me, a memory stirred, something my late husband once told me. When people show you their truth, don't fight it. Let them. And then remember who you are. That was the moment I decided. They would learn exactly who I was. Not the fragile widow they thought they could dismiss, but the woman who once built her life from nothing. And this time I wouldn't be silent. After that morning, the air in the house changed. It wasn't loud or sudden. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just a heaviness, like the kind that settles before a storm you can feel in your bones. I started to notice how my presence made them uncomfortable. Every time I walked into a room, conversation stopped. My sister's husband would clear his throat, pretending to check his phone, and my sister would busy herself rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. Even the children, the ones who used to run into my arms every morning, began glancing toward their mother first, as if seeking permission before hugging me. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that grief had made me too sensitive, too fragile. But deep down I knew the truth. It wasn't grief that had changed, it was people. Kindness has an expiration date for those who never earned it. And once they've taken what they need from you, they start to resent the reminder of their own debt. I had become that reminder. At night, I'd sit on the porch alone, watching the tide roll in. The sea had always been my comfort, endless, patient, forgiving. But now, even its rhythm felt cruel. Because no matter how many waves broke on the shore, they always took a piece of the sand with them. And I realized that's what was happening to me. Little by little, piece by piece, they were taking my place. My sister's husband started inviting his friends to their beach house. I heard him say it once on the phone, their beach house. 2 small words that carried a theft so silent, so deliberate, it almost made me laugh. Almost. I began sleeping in the guest room, the one with no view of the ocean, the one that used to be for visitors. It was easier that way. Easier to disappear quietly than to fight for space in a home that no longer remembered my name. But even as I tried to shrink myself, life kept throwing small reminders at me. Title deed still bore my name. The mortgage had long been paid by me. The walls, the windows, even the floorboards had my husband's handiwork in them. This house wasn't just mine, it was us. Our memories, our legacy. One afternoon, while I was watering the plants near the back porch, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. They didn't lower their voices this time. "Once she's gone," my sister's husband said, "we can finally remodel. Maybe even sell it." And my sister, my own blood, didn't stop him. She just said, "She's too old to handle all this. It's better for her." That sentence, "it's better for her," echoed in my mind for days. It's what people say when they want to hurt you gently so they can sleep at night. I didn't confront them. I didn't ask for explanations or apologies. I just sat on the porch that evening, holding my husband's old watch in my hand. The gold was worn, the glass cracked, but it still ticked steady as ever. And I thought maybe that's what I'll be now. Steady, silent, but still ticking. Because something inside me had shifted. The woman they saw as weak had gone quiet for too long. And silence, I've learned, can be the sharpest blade when the time is right. That night before bed, I unlocked the old wooden chest in my closet, the one no one had touched in years. Inside were yellowed papers, old letters, and one thin folder marked with a name I hadn't used in decades. My maiden name. And just below it, the certificate that once defined my entire life before I became someone's wife, someone's sister, someone's burden. Bar admission. State of California. Occupation. Attorney at law. I hadn't practiced in years. But suddenly, the pieces of who I used to be didn't feel so far away. And as the wind howled softly outside the window, I smiled for the first time in months. Because I knew the storm had begun. I didn't plan revenge that night. It wasn't anger that kept me awake. It was clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop pretending not to see. For years I had believed that kindness could soften people. That gratitude was something you could earn if you just gave enough of yourself. But now, sitting in that quiet room surrounded by the ghosts of my old life, I realized that some people mistake love for weakness. And I had given them the perfect lesson in how to use it against me. The next morning, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Mail with my name missing. Phone calls I wasn't told about. And then one afternoon when I went to make myself tea, I found a real estate brochure lying open on the counter. My beach house, my home, circled in red. A note scribbled beside it in my sister's handwriting, listing photos next week. My hands trembled so badly that the teacup slipped from my fingers and shattered across the floor. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Because when your heart has been broken enough times, even pain becomes quiet. That night, while they laughed in the living room, I opened the family laptop. I'd never needed passwords before, but it turns out when people think you're invisible, they stop hiding things properly. I searched through folders, emails, contracts, until I found it. A file titled Property Transfer Agreement. They had already filled out my name, forged my signature, dated it for the following week. For a long time, I just stared at the screen, reading my own name in a stranger's handwriting. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Control. It was strange, really. The moment you see the truth, you stop fearing it. Their betrayal didn't make me small. It made me remember who I was before they decided I was weak. The next morning I played my role. I smiled, made breakfast, folded laundry. They believed the silence was surrender. But inside I was taking notes. I remembered every corner of the law they'd forgotten. Every clause they'd never understand. Because this house, this sanctuary built from my husband's dreams and my lifetime of work, was protected under joint marital property law. Which meant even if I were gone, the title would never truly belong to them. Later that week, my sister mentioned casually that a lawyer friend would be visiting to help with some paperwork. I nodded, pretending to know nothing, though my pulse quickened. I spent that afternoon on the porch again, watching the tide. Every wave looked different now, not as a reminder of loss but of rhythm, the rise and fall, the constant return. When the day came, they wore their best smiles. The lawyer arrived, briefcase in hand, full of counterfeit confidence. I stayed in my room, pretending to nap, listening to them rehearse the story they'd tell me. How it was all just a routine check, how they'd need my signature for insurance purposes. But as they plotted downstairs, I opened that old folder again. My maiden name stared back at me. Margaret Hale, attorney at law. It felt strange saying it aloud, like greeting an old friend. I had buried that version of myself the day I married and promised never to return to the courtroom. But that day she came alive again. That night I called an old colleague, one of the few who still owed me a favor. He answered with surprise, then silence when I explained what had happened. When I finished, he said something that stayed with me. "Margaret, you taught me once that the law isn't about who screams the loudest. It's about who knows how to wait." So I waited. And when they brought me those forged papers the next day, with their fake compassion and false smiles, I took the pen, smiled back and signed nothing. Instead, I let them think I had. I placed the papers neatly in the folder, excused myself and went to my room. Then, with the steadiness of a surgeon, I replaced their forged copies with real ones I had prepared, ones that transferred the ownership of the property solely to me. That night they celebrated. They toasted to their victory, laughing downstairs while I packed quietly. Because the next morning, they would wake up to a world that no longer belonged to them. And as I stood by the window, the ocean whispering in the distance, I thought of my late husband. His words from years ago, the last thing he told me before he died. If they ever try to take what's yours, don't fight them. Outsmart them. I finally understood what he meant. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about reclaiming the woman I had once been. And by sunrise, justice would have her say. I woke before dawn that morning. The world was still dark, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid of the day waiting ahead. I sat at the kitchen table, the air thick with the scent of salt and quiet, and waited for the sound of footsteps upstairs. When my sister's husband came down first, half awake and full of arrogance, I greeted him softly. The look he gave me was the same one you'd give an unwanted guest, or perhaps in his eyes, a burden that had stayed too long. He poured himself coffee, told me they'd be finalizing the sale today, and smirked like he'd already won. I just nodded and said, "I know." They left not long after, chattering about lawyers, commissions, and new beginnings that would be built on the ashes of everything I had worked for. I watched them drive away, the morning light glinting off their car. Then I stood, locked the door behind them and called my attorney. He was already waiting for my signal. The real documents, the ones I had switched, had been processed overnight. The house, the land, the accounts attached to it. All were now legally, irrevocably mine. Their version of the contract. A forged copy with invalid signatures and traceable fraud. It was only a matter of time before the authorities connected the dots. But revenge, I learned, doesn't need to shout. It only needs to breathe. By noon they returned, expecting paperwork and victory. What they found instead was a sealed letter taped to the front door. My handwriting, steady, deliberate. They must have read it a dozen times before realizing what it meant. "You once told me I was useless, that I'd built nothing of my own. But I built this house, brick by brick, memory by memory. And before you could destroy it, I saved it the only way I knew how. By reminding you who you were dealing with. Not a weak woman, but the one who taught justice how to wait." Later that day, when the police arrived to question them about the forged documents, I sat quietly on the porch, watching the ocean roll in. They shouted, argued, tried to spin their story. But the truth doesn't bend forever. Snap. And when it does, it cuts clean. My sister came to me that evening, her voice trembling, her pride finally cracking. She said I'd gone too far, that family doesn't treat family this way. I simply looked at her and said, "Neither does betrayal." There was no anger in me. Only a calm so deep it almost frightened her. Because the moment you stop begging people to love you, you begin to see how peaceful freedom can be. The news of their fraud spread quickly. Their lawyer refused to represent them after the evidence surfaced. The fake signatures, the secret bank account, the emails. I didn't expose them publicly. I didn't have to. Life has its own way of returning what's owed. They had tried to strip me of everything I owned, and instead they lost everything that mattered to them. Their business fell apart when clients learned of the charges. Their so-called friends disappeared. And my sister, who had once bragged that I'd die forgotten, found herself knocking on doors that would no longer open. But I wasn't celebrating. I was remembering. Because even as justice found its way, I couldn't forget the nights I'd stayed awake worrying about them. The times I'd prayed for their happiness. The countless chances I'd given before realizing that kindness without boundaries is a slow form of self-destruction. That evening, as the sun set over the beach, I walked barefoot to the edge of the water. The tide was high, brushing against the hem of my dress. I thought of my husband again. How he'd always said the ocean never keeps anything that doesn't belong to it. Maybe love is like that too. The house was quiet when I returned. My sister and her husband had packed their things, though I hadn't told them to. Shame has a way of doing what words cannot. As their car disappeared down the road, I felt no triumph. Just an ending. Clean, necessary one. I sat by the window with my tea, watching the sky turn that soft, forgiving shade of pink before dusk. The kind of light that makes even broken things look beautiful. And for the first time in a long time I whispered, "It's over." But deep inside I knew, it wasn't really over. Because the most dangerous thing in the world isn't an angry woman. It's a calm one who finally remembers what she's capable of. And tomorrow, when the world asked who I was, I'd no longer say retired lawyer, sister, or mother. I'd say, a woman who finally stood for herself. It's strange how silence sounds different once the noise leaves your life. For months, the air inside that beach house had been heavy, filled with tension, deceit, and the echoes of voices that didn't belong there anymore. But after they were gone, it felt lighter. The same walls that once trapped me now felt like they were breathing again. I spent my mornings walking by the water, just listening. To the gulls, to the hum of the tide, to my own thoughts learning to soften. There's something healing about the ocean. How it keeps rolling no matter what's been lost, no matter who walks away. People in town whispered about what happened. Some called me ruthless. Others called me brave. But the truth is, I wasn't either. I was just tired. Tired of being taken advantage of. Tired of mistaking silence for peace. Tired of shrinking myself just to make others comfortable. I had spent years believing that being good meant forgiving everything. Every insult, every betrayal, every quiet cruelty disguised as family concern. But I learned the hard way that forgiveness without change is just permission to be hurt again. My sister never apologized. Not really. She sent a message through someone else months later, saying they'd lost their business, their house, their standing. I didn't reply. Because sometimes, silence is the only language that truth understands. I still think about my son, though. He had been caught between us all, confused, hurt, and angry. It took time, but he eventually saw what had been done. One afternoon he came to visit. He stood at the doorway, hesitant, the way a boy looks when he's not sure if his mother will still recognize him. I did. Because no matter how old our children become, we always recognize them, even behind their mistakes. We sat on the porch, drinking tea in quiet. The sea breeze played with his hair the way my fingers used to when he was small. He asked if I was angry with him. I told him no. Anger fades when you learn its purpose. It's there to wake you up, not to keep you burning. He said he was proud of me. That he hadn't realized how strong I was. I smiled and told him the truth. I didn't either until I had to be. That night after he left, I walked through every room of the house. The same home that once echoed with betrayal, now filled with a calm hum of forgiveness. I stopped in the doorway of the living room, where the last fight had taken place, and I realized something. Revenge had never been my goal. Peace was. Because when you finally stop trying to prove your worth to those who don't see it, you make space for people who do. Months passed. The seasons changed. The house aged beautifully like me, quietly without apology. I began painting again, something I hadn't done since my husband was alive. My hands were unsteady at first, but the colors helped me heal. Every stroke on canvas felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd forgotten in the noise of everyone else's expectations. Sometimes I sit outside and watch the sea glow silver under the moonlight. It's beautiful in a way only pain can teach you to appreciate. The waves keep returning, no matter how many times they crash, and that's what I've become. A wave that learned how to come back stronger. People often ask me how I could stay so calm through everything. I tell them because I finally understood something simple. You don't need to scream for justice when truth already has your voice. I don't wish harm on my sister or her husband. They will face their lessons in their own time. Life always collects its debts. But I do wish them clarity, the kind that only arrives when everything you built on lies finally collapses. As for me, built something new. Not with walls or money, but with boundaries and peace. And it's stronger than anything they ever tried to take from me. Now, every morning, I open the windows and let the sea breeze in. The light spills across the floors, touching the same furniture that once bore witness to betrayal. But instead of feeling sorrow, I feel gratitude. 'Cause I survived it. I rose from it. And I became someone I'm finally proud to be. Sometimes I stand by the window with my cup of tea, watching the waves kiss the sand and whisper, thank you. Not to them, but to myself, for not giving up when it would have been easier to. Because that's the quiet miracle of survival. It teaches you that you were never too weak. You were just surrounded by people who needed you to believe you were. And so, my story ends not with revenge, but with release. Not with fire, but with calm. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away, with your dignity intact, your heart still open, and your peace finally earned. That day on the beach, I watched the sun disappear beneath the horizon and whispered, sometimes heartbreak isn't punishment. It's protection. And for the first time I meant it. For the first time I was free. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by subscribe my YouTube channel so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.